Who was the biggest winner from OTA practices on Thursday? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked on Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can check him out on Twitter at McCoolBCB. Landon, the Cowboys wrapped up the second week of OTA practices. What was your biggest takeaway from this week?
There's lots. We'll talk about some of the defensive stuff. I think a little bit next week, if I'm not mistaken. So
Monday.
Monday. That's right. Every day, make sure you check it out on Monday. But I think overall, my notes are. It seems like they are still trying to work out different players at different spots. They're still trying to figure out roles. They're still trying to figure out. What some of these guys can do. I mean, there's a lot of young players on this team, and there's a lot of, especially on the offensive side, there's a lot of new coaches. So yes. I think there's still kind of a feeling out process that's going on for a lot of these guys, and it sounds like you're getting the normal best shape of their life. The vibes are immaculate.
Yeah, you should probably ignore all that. I will say one of the things that you just mentioned was there's a lot of young players on this team. Yeah. And it's why bringing in somebody like Brandin Cooks, I think, is such a big deal. And we got some quotes from Jalen Tolbert yesterday. I don't know if you saw them, but
yes.
Jalen Tolbert talking about Brandin Cooks and his leadership and how he's kind of helped him put away the 2022 season where he really didn't get on the field. I think of everything we've seen over the last 2 weeks from OTAs, I think it's just how much this team needed somebody like Brandin Cooks on that side of the ball.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good point. There's been such a focus on, the youth movement on this team, and how outside of Dak and there's Zach Martin, a couple other guys. Mm-hmm. This is really a very young team, and I think one thing that we've heard just the entire time since Brandin Cooks has been here is just what a professional he is. And it's come through a whole bunch of different forms. I mean, the Tolbert conversation was fascinating, just like how Cooks was so willing and so giving to talk to him. He talked to Tolbert about flushing last season. Mm-hmm. He kept on referring to it as flushing it away and just, trying to get it out of your head and focus on taking your best step forward. And you hear that, you hear about just like the standard he sets, just like, the level of professionalism. One of the things that was really interesting that I think it was, maybe it was Tolbert, but maybe it was one of the other receivers. Maybe it was CeeDee Lamb. They were talking about, the fact that this guy has gone to, 4 different teams and had 1,000 yards at each spot. He's had 1,000 yards, I think, each of the last 6 seasons. So I think that the process that it requires, the kind of discipline in your process that requires to kind of be playbook and team agnostic and still produce at a high level. That's the part about Brandin Cooks that has been really fascinating so far, is just hearing just how committed he is to his craft and like how he sets a high bar and a high standard, and how he's really trying to drag everyone up to his level and bring everyone along with him.
Yeah, I remember in 2019, when the Cowboys brought in Randall Cobb, I remember Michael Gallup saying a lot of the same things. Like Michael Gallup had a much better rookie year than what Jalen Tolbert had, but it was one of those things like Amari Cooper was the wide receiver 1 in this offense, but he was like 25, 26 years old. Like he was still pretty young into his NFL career. And it was Randall Cobb, who obviously had success in Green Bay, that was able to kind of be the leader of that room. And now you hear Randall Cobb talking about how much he admires Dak and all that kind of stuff. But I just felt like, look at last year. This wide receiver room was led by CeeDee Lamb, who was going into year 3 of his.
He's still figuring it out.
He's still figuring out. And it was, Simi Fehoko and Dennis Houston, an undrafted free agent, and just a bunch of other guys. It probably really does help to have somebody who's been on 4 different teams and has been 1,000-yard receiver on every single one of those teams, being like, hey, this is how you practice. This is what you need to do in the offseason. This is, you do X, X, and X, and all of a sudden you're going to have a great season. I think the more that we see of Brandin Cooks, the more excited I am about this trade.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, right? Is that we knew what we were getting on the field. We knew what we were getting as a player, as a guy who produces, no matter the situation, a speed merchant as a receiver. We knew those things just by watching on tape. What we've been discovering is just how valuable he can be off the field, and how much this locker room, especially that room, the wide receiver room, needed somebody with veteran talent that knew, the ins and outs of the position. I mean, CeeDee Lamb again is the number one wide receiver. There's no doubts about that. But he's, like we said, very, very young. So getting a guy in here who has been in the league for as long as Brandin Cooks, who has played with a wide variety of players and schemes, and has produced everywhere he's gone. Like, there are a huge wealth of knowledge, of library of knowledge that he can provide to these younger guys to kind of give them the tips of trade, tips of the trade in order to kind of produce and actually get on the field and produce themselves.
Well, the other thing that Jalen Tolbert had a quote about Brandin Cooks, he was the one leading drills and coaching up the young players. And he was noticing little things in the route runnings that Tolbert needs to work on and clean up. And that kind of stuff is just invaluable. And everybody says that's why you pay coaches, but there's a difference when there's a 60-year-old guy telling you what to do and one of your peers who's doing the same exact drills, showing you, hey, if you do this thing 1% better, it's going to lead to you becoming a better football player. So again, I think of everything that we've heard over the last 2 weeks, I think this Brandin Cooks trade, even if it doesn't work out in the terms of him putting up big yardage and big stats and all that kind of stuff, I think his experience is going to be invaluable.
I think it already has been. Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, let's get to some other notes from OTAs, including Jalen Tolbert, who is in a little bit of a battle right now for wide receiver 4. We'll get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make a fast break to FanDuel during the NBA playoffs, because right now new customers can get a no-sweat first bet up to $2,500. That is $2,500 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Nuggets look pretty good last night. I think I would bet on them again to win on Sunday night. There's no better place to bet on all the playoff action than America's #1 sportsbook. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn and get a no sweat first bet up to $2,500. That is FanDuel.com/LockedOn. FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every day. Everydayers. On Monday's show, we're going to be talking about Micah Parsons and how he no longer wants to lead the NFL in sacks. Okay, he didn't really say that. He's not focusing on that as much anymore. We'll discuss what that means on Monday. Then let's talk about this wide receiver battle, because I saw a note from Patrick Walker of DallasCowboys.com that he believes that Simi Fehoko and Jalen Tolbert are neck and neck in the battle right now for that 4th wide receiver spot. The Fehoko might actually be ahead. So my question for you, are you buying the Simi Fehoko hype?
I honestly view this as Jalen Tolbert hype, because that's how much I feel about Simi Fehoko.
Ooh, okay.
So for me, that's hype to Jalen Tolbert, because I remember last year in training camp what Simi Fehoko was doing. And it was a lot of this, and if we go back and look at what we were talking about in training camp, probably up until like the last 2 or 3 weeks of training camp, Simi Fehoko was having an incredible camp. He was catching everything. He was running with the ones. He was beating, first team corners at times. And then obviously we get into the season. He doesn't get a ton of opportunity. And then he gets injured in, I think it was October. And that they basically put him on IR with a shoulder injury for the rest of the year. So, I think that Simi Fehoko was ready. I earmarked Simi Fehoko's name when he got injured, because I was like, he's going to come back next year and really put the pedal to the metal and take it to the next level, because he was on his way to doing it last year. So what I'm getting at is that I expected Fehoko to be 2 to 3 steps ahead of Jalen Tolbert, just based on where we saw the two of them last year. I think Tolbert, the fact that he's improved enough to kind of be in the conversation already at wide receiver 4, I think bodes well. I think Fehoko is a guy that needs to kind of learn the nuance of the position a little bit more. But I mean, if you talk about what he is, he's a big, fast, quick player who can play above the rim. And no matter how many times the cornerbacks went against him last year in training camp, it still seems like they were constantly surprised by how fast he was because of how big he is. So he has traits that are very, very desirable. And so the fact that Tolbert has been able to elevate his game to where Fehoko was, considering where they were at this point last year, I think it's impressive for Tolbert.
I honestly don't know what to make of this because I think Fehoko is somebody who should look good in non-contact drills, right? Because he's just so big and athletic. So I'm not surprised that he's having a good OTA. And I agree with you. Like, I thought he looked so much better in training camp and the preseason compared to what we saw the previous year. He is a little bit of an older player, but he has not played a lot of football. So I kind of feel like this is the year, right? Like it probably needs to happen this year for Fehoko if it ever is going to happen. I will say I'd like to see Tolbert, potentially separate himself from Fehoko, but maybe it's just one of those things where Fehoko, again, he has got a year of experience and it's clear he's the more athletic player. So this is a fun battle. And I'm not sure we're going to get any answers over the next couple of weeks. I'm not sure that we're going to get any answers by the end of training camp and preseason. This might be something that kind of drags out all the way through the season. And maybe the Cowboys, kind of use these guys depending on the game and the situation and the opponent. But it is nice to see that Fehoko continues to kind of build some of that positive momentum. And this is the second week in a row that we've heard that he's had a really nice time. And it sounds like from all the reports that he's been almost lining up exclusively with the number ones, which I found fascinating.
Well, I mean, look, I think he earned that through a lot of what happened last year. Look, I mean, did the wide receiver 2 situation end up as we had hoped? No, it didn't.
No.
Fehoko and Tolbert, I think Fehoko and Brown specifically, who were the names that we were pairing a lot last year at training camp, there was a certain point in training camp where the acceleration stopped and they hit a plateau and then it just didn't get to where it needed to be. But I think Fehoko has taken that, where he was last year, he's recovered from that injury and he's continued to grow. And I think the thing that's really fascinating here is that both Fehoko and Tolbert are also very different types of wide receivers than what you have in with your other 3. And so I think that there's value in having all these guys. And I think that Fehoko, if he makes the team and is on the game day roster, I think he sees snaps simply because he's a bigger target than anybody else that you've got on the roster at wide receiver. So I would not at all be surprised if this situation ended in both of these guys being, kind of regular contributors on the offense. Maybe I'm not talking like, 10 targets. I'm talking, like
combined, they have
targets.
4 targets a game.
Yeah, exactly. I think just as a mix up, as it gives some guy a rest, maybe a package or a play or two that you like to run through these guys. I think that's a reasonable goal for where they could go.
Yeah, and maybe Fehoko has a bigger role if the tight ends continue to struggle, which we'll get to that in a second. I just have one little note on the offensive line before we move on. It was the same offensive line starters that we saw last week. Tyler Smith at left tackle, Matt Farniak at left guard, Tyler Biadasz at center, Josh Ball at right guard, and Tyron Smith at right tackle. We have not seen Zach Martin practice at all. Any concerns there?
No, I tend to think from everything we're hearing, like they're going beyond being careful. It seems like with a lot of this stuff, anyone who's got a little bit of anything is being held off the field completely. I mean, have we seen DeMarcus Lawrence yet? I
don't think so.
I think the vets have basically been told they don't need to necessarily.
Well, which is it. I think you're right, but it's interesting that Tyron Smith has been the one that's been there.
Well, I think the difference there is that he's playing a new position, right?
Maybe that's the case, right?
I mean, that's to get more reps at right tackle to feel comfortable if that's where he's going to end up, or if he's going to end up playing swing or whatever that situation.
Fair point. One more note on the offensive line. Matt Willetsko this week working at right tackle, but not only right tackle, but also left guard. That is interesting. I'll just say that.
Yeah, not even limiting him to being a left side player, just basically moving him everywhere. I mean, look, to have a swing guy who could play 4 spots would be incredible. So
how likely is that though?
I mean, I think they're just seeing what's possible. Look, again, we talked about this. The spots where they're going to see the most of this kind of stuff is in the place where we have the newest coaches. We have a new offensive line coach. They're going to try these guys out at a little bit everywhere.
All right, let's talk about one thing that typically happens in OTAs. It's always these puff pieces, and everybody looks great, and everybody's in the best shape of their lives, as you mentioned at the top of the show. But occasionally, you get some concerning news. Let's discuss that next. All right, Landon, we need to talk about the tight ends. I saw a note from 105.3 The Fan that, first of all, Luke Schoonmaker, the Cowboys' second-round pick at tight end, did not practice this week as he had a protective boot on his right foot. He was also dealing with a groin injury last week. And then we saw Jake Ferguson and Peyton Hendershot struggle on Thursday. I saw Peyton Hendershot dropped, I believe, 2 passes, one that would have been a touchdown. And then there was a play. I saw, this was from Brian Broaddus, that Jake Ferguson, I was on a third down play, turned the wrong way. Dak was forced to throw the ball away, and then Dak kind of chewed him out and gave him an earful. I will say this is one of the concerns that I have about just believing that you can replace Dalton Schultz with anybody. I think Schultz was really good. It was on the same wavelength as Dak Prescott a lot of times, and just knowing where to be, knowing where to turn around, and finding the soft spots in the zone. I will say I'm a little bit nervous about the tight end position just after week 2 of OTAs.
A couple of notes here. One of the 2 drop passes by Hendershot fell right into Eric Scott's hands. So it was interception. I think that was in the end zone too, if I'm not mistaken.
We saw that happen last year against the Titans.
What I was just gonna say. Flashbacks from last year a little bit, right? And Ferguson, it sounds like it was a red zone situation from what I understand, and just didn't get good body position on the defender to present a target to Dak, which is huge. And this goes to what the concern is and why the idea of, I think, relying solely on one of these younger tight ends. Well, yeah, relying solely on one of these younger tight ends as opposed to trying to cobble together a situation with all 3 may be dangerous, because you're still dealing with a group. You don't have that one guy who is the experienced veteran tight end who has played in a bunch of games and has seen it all. And the reason that's important is because of what Marcus just described. It's the nuance. It's the small things like, okay, yeah, you ran the route, but are you presenting a target to the quarterback who's scrambling for his life, on the 5-yard line with 2
which Schultz was fantastic at, right? Like that's one thing we don't give Schultz enough credit for, is he was so good at just knowing how to get open after the play was already done, kind of, right? Like that second play.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the kind of thing that it's experience based. It's playtime based. And those are the kind of things that, look, is playing a rookie tight end going to give you more experience there? No, but I think what it gives you by kind of using all 3 is that you can cobble together a good performance if one guy is struggling, or if they found something on a guy. It just gives you more opportunity to kind of try different things with different talented players. So I'm not super worried about the tight ends. It's a group that's talented. There could be a lot more boom or bust with the position.
Just a lot of variance, right?
Yeah, just a lot more variance, and that could be, that's what variance is. It could be a good thing and a bad thing, right? So, but yeah, I think that there is some comfort, or has been for a long time, with the Dallas Cowboys, that for what? When was the last time you felt unstable at tight end? It's been a long time.
Yeah.
So
because even when Jason Witten retired, there was still Blake Jarwin, who we were excited about, right?
Yeah. And Schultz. Even Schultz at that point had some more experience than what Ferguson has.
Sure.
So I think that's where we are. Is that this is the first time in a really long time that we feel confident about the players. We like the players that we have there. But there's not the same high floor that we're used to at the position.
That's where I know I like this guy a lot, but like, if Ferguson and Hendershot struggle, like, is this where we see Sean McEwen get more snaps?
I knew this
was coming. Like, again, I like him, but his floor is so low. But I think he can do everything at a baseline level. And if you're not getting that from Hendershot and Ferguson and Schoonmaker's having a hard time staying on the field, maybe we see more of McEwen, and that just doesn't make the offense overly dynamic at all.
Yeah, maybe. Or maybe what they do is that they just use a little bit less 12 personnel. Maybe.
Well, I'm just worried about like 3rd and 6. Like that's where Dalton Schultz was so good. It's like, okay, hey, it's 3rd and 5, get open, make a catch. I don't trust any of these tight ends yet to be in the right spot on a huge play in a game.
And that's where I think you're going to start seeing more reliance on a better wide receiver core than you had last year, right? You've got hopefully a more springy Gallup that gives you more 3rd down options, because one of the things that Gallup was really good at was getting open on 3rd downs when you needed him to. Yep. And obviously Brandin Cooks is another guy who has a lot of experience doing that, can get open on multiple levels. You have CeeDee Lamb. Yeah, it's not so much that you're shifting that Dalton Schultz target on 3rd down to another tight end. It's just that, okay, now that those targets are available, maybe we give some more to CD. Maybe we spread them out a little bit in other spots. Hey, maybe you got a fullback in Hutter Lepke who can, sneak out of the backfield and be your outlet there.
I was going to say more Simi Fehoko, honestly. Like you can have
maybe
him do some of the more inside routes if you want some more size and athleticism, but I think he's going to run into the same problems, right? He's just not a very refined receiver after not playing a ton of football.
But he's played a lot of football with Dak. I think that's the
right?
That's the difference, right? In that, so he understands the nuance of at least what he's supposed to be doing.
Yep.
Now, doing that against NFL defenders, that's not always the same thing. And it's the Mike Tyson, right? Everybody's got a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And that's what happens with a lot of these wide receivers. Like, okay, I know what I'm doing. Yep. I know the coverage. And then they get pressed to the line of scrimmage and they don't want to go any further. So it's part of the game.
I do want to remind people it's June 2nd. So we have a lot of time, and we know with young players, they can get better really fast. Like
they get better during the season, like that's part of this.
And when you're practicing every day at training camp, you can get better really quickly, but it is something to note and something to watch. Like if we continue to see some of these same issues as we get into July and August, I think that's when you should get a little bit concerned about that tight end production. That is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every day. Again, every day is a Monday show. We're going to talk about some of the biggest takeaways on defense that we saw, including Micah Parsons, Jordan Lewis. We're going to talk more about Eric Scott, who continues to put together some impressive performances. So make sure you guys are tuning in for that. You can follow the show on YouTube. We are free and available on all platforms. Go follow Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosher, and we'll see you next time.